Welcome to Matrescence Unfiltered, the podcast exploring what really happens to your identity, ambition, and career when you become a mother. Matrescence is the transition into motherhood, and it's one of the biggest identity shifts a woman will ever go through. Yet, when it comes to our careers, it's still barely understood. So often, motherhood gets framed as something to push through and bounce back from.
We think it's something else entirely, a capability shift, and we think it's time to name it and to talk about it properly. I'm Rose, coach, consultant, and researcher completing a master's in organisational psychology.
And I'm Bianca, a chief marketing officer, pregnant, and living this experience in real time. Each episode, we take one belief about motherhood and work that doesn't hold up under scrutiny and break it down properly.
Using research, lived experience, and honest conversations about what sustainable high performance actually looks like when your identity is shifting.
Welcome to Matrescence Unfiltered. We're really glad you're here. So today we are talking about careers. This is a topic very close to my heart because, of course, careers have defined so much for us, as we've spoken about before. But in this episode, we're going to get a little bit more into the career penalty. We're going to talk about some of the real data that's impacting women and start to think about what we can really do about it. Before we get into this topic today, Rose, as somebody who is approaching their maternity leave and, of course, has been having a lot of thoughts around career, identity, what this means for this career that I've built for 15 years, what would you say is the general sentiment of the women that you're talking to? If you were to almost create a pie chart of how they feel about their careers, how positive or optimistic they may feel, or how conflicted they are, what are the emotions attached to it for them?
The ambition is still absolutely there. That has gone nowhere. But the biggest shift that I see from speaking to these women are they have more boundaries in place. They are hyper-focused when they are doing their work. And they also, they have less room for the noise. So whereas before they might have got involved a little bit more in some of the internal politics or the extra, 10, 15-minute chat between meetings, these women are now hyper-focused. They've got a limited period to get their work done because when they go home, they've got a different job. They are caregiving. So I'd say it's more around, it's not a shift in ambition. It is a shift in tolerance to the noise and everything else that's going on around them. That's the biggest shift I see. And it might be that their definition of high performance is reframed where prior to having a baby, high performance might have meant super late nights, putting your hand up for everything. Whereas now it's like, can I do a really good job in the time that I've got? It's less about getting involved, presenteeism. It's now about output over hours. So not hours put in, it's output and what they are contributing to the organization in their hours that they've got. Because when they clock off work, they are caregiving.
So less about performative productivity
Exactly,
and more about
yeah.
hyper-focusing and actual impact, which, irrespective of whether you are caregiving outside of work or not, surely every CEO and leadership team would want that from their workforce.
Yeah. I think, you're right there. It's performance, not performative.
That's the perfect distinction. So I want to think about timelines here because we cannot have a conversation about motherhood and careers in our culture today without talking about timelines and the fact that we know women are having babies later. So, fascinating data here. The average age of the first child being born in the UK has gone from a mother at 23 in the early 1970s to 29 in 2024. Remember, that's a UK average. If you're coming at that from a London perspective, that age is higher. ONS projections say that girls born in 2025 won't hit an average of one child per woman until age 36.
I think in London, the average age for a first-time mother is around 40 now. Women aren't choosing their career over motherhood. They're just navigating a system that makes it feel like those two things have to be sequential. Many women have this mindset where, and I know I certainly do/did, is you've got to get as far up the ladder as you possibly can to make it easier for you when you come back from maternity leave to maintain that performance. It's not even necessarily around continuing to climb when you come back. It's around maintaining that sustainable performance that you have spent so long working towards and getting into that room, into that place.
I want to be completely real about this because that message that women receive around get established first, then have a baby, you have to be at a certain level. That is my career story. When I was around 18 and completely oblivious to the ways of the world, I thought that I would have 3 children by the time that I was 30. That was my plan. I'll be having my first child at 33, which is actually younger
Mm,
than I expected to have a child.
you're a teen
Because
mum.
once I got into teen mum, super young, I was looking very seriously into egg freezing. I went to a clinic in central London, and everybody in that waiting room was a career woman. There were lawyers, there were bankers, there were sales directors, and they were all late 30s. And that was always the path that I saw for myself because I didn't, again, being really real here, think that I had almost enough credibility banked before doing this. So women are contending with egg counts, bank accounts, clout, reputation, and a whole multitude of factors that are really difficult when we've also had, we can't have this conversation without mentioning this, economic slowdown.
Mm.
There's not been as much of a salary increase keeping up with inflation in the time that you and I, as 30 somethings, have been building our careers as we would have expected. Everything is more expensive. And the opportunities that we've had to fight for have taken longer than we would have expected. And in my mind, I always thought as I got into my career, I cannot become a mother until, in my line of work, I become a chief marketing officer. Anything before that is going to stunt my growth. So I really have been in this race to get to that level. I'm very privileged and fortunate to be in that level. Let's acknowledge that.
Mm.
But have I been conscious of it the whole way through? Yes, I have. Was I on a path of, like my partner at the time, he froze his sperm. I was going to freeze my eggs, and then our marriage did break down for various reasons, including this very topic. But I really felt so much time pressure. I did all the test results with fertility to get my AMH results. I did my ultrasounds of my womb to get my egg counts, all of these things to buy myself more time. And I'm just thinking about how much pressure that is. So that's a little bit about my story and what I was thinking at 18 versus the panic at 25 versus turning 30 and saying, not yet, not yet, not yet. And honestly, how different my path to motherhood has looked. I could talk
Yeah.
about this forever, but I just wanted to start there, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it and how it links to your reflections and your situation too.
If I think about where I was when I was starting out my career, so I didn't finish my A levels. At 17, I actually dropped out of school because I decided I didn't want to go to university. In my head, I didn't want to be a lawyer. I didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't want to be anything that I felt that I needed to go to university to get a degree for. I'd seen friends who had gone to uni and studied random subjects and who thought going to uni was the right thing. And actually, for me, I think that might have been the smartest thing I did at 17 years
You were
old.
way ahead of the trend there, Rose.
I think as well, so my socioeconomic background, I didn't come literally from any, my dad was a roofer, my mum's a civil servant, she works at the job centre. She has the same job today that she started after returning from maternity leave and having me. So she's worked there for 33 years. And
Wow.
we were very much a working class household. So I think for me, going into uni to do something that I didn't think was going to add value financially to my future at that point, because I couldn't see it. I share this because I think that helped me shape my career decisions as I moved up in my career. I made some really interesting leapfrog moves into tech, and then I moved from tech into building out my own learning and development function. So I'm one of those classic millennials, 18 months to 2 years in one place, move on, get a nice pay rise, get a little bit more breadth and depth in my role. And then I think by the time I'd got to 25 then, I was really just enjoying earning a little bit of money and living in London and having fun. So children were not even on my radar at that point. And then now, I guess, thinking about moving into my 30s, that is the time when I started to think about it a little bit more seriously. It always felt like a problem for later on. And I was really loving the work that I do. I got to work for some really exciting companies. I worked at Revolut as their global head of learning and development. It was only when I guess I was starting to get these much bigger roles. And then around me, my friends were having babies. And then that's kind of when I started to feel a little bit of, not pressure, I don't think that's the right word. I think thinking about the practicalities of motherhood and children and what that looks like. I would say probably up until 2 years ago, my mindset was I can't be a mom until I'm a CPO, because that was the kind of trajectory I was on. I really wanted to move into a CPO role. I got made redundant, and it gave me a completely different perspective on actually how I wanted to shape my career. And that's when I decided to make the move into consulting. I wanted to work with businesses to solve really interesting problems. It's definitely a consideration I took into account when you're moving jobs, moving careers. You want to know what that maternity policy looks like. You want to understand if there's shared parental leave. These are things that never even crossed my mind when I was taking a job at 25. And yeah, I think your shift in how you view work, but also kind of setting yourself up from a family planning perspective, even though it might not be immediate, that was something that surprised me, I think, in the last couple of years.
You touch on something there that I think is a very important point to underline, which is background and the story that we have in our mind about money very early on, what it takes to feel financially secure. And if you do come from a working class background, how that actually impacts the perception of risks that you're able to take, because there is that constant fragility and you're constantly kind of running from the idea of like you might not be able, you don't have the support that some people do family wise. There's so much in that I think you've had such a successful career, and I'm glad to hear you owning some of the big jobs and big companies and brands that you've worked for. But of course, for you, pushing forward and being like, how far can I take this? How much is like enough? Actually, if you come from a background where there was financial instability, your perspective on that is so shaped by that origin story.
Yeah, and I genuinely think the fact that I didn't have anything to fall back on, but
Nothing to fall back on.
myself, was a huge rocket, I guess, a huge driver for me to earn as much as I can, save as much as I can. Even when wasn't earning very much, I remember I would put a couple of £100 a month aside to have as a safety net fund just in case I needed it. I'm not like a super saver, super investor, but like I would say it's given me more of a mindset of like, how can I be better with money? How can I educate myself better with money? Understanding, some of the numbers around the motherhood penalty. So women who work full time earn 83p for every £1 a man earns, and the gap widens significantly when your children arrive. The motherhood penalty accounts for nearly 80% of the gender pay gap. So these are all considerations that are going through my head when I'm thinking about family planning and, trying to earn and get to that level as much as possible. But then as I said, with part of my story is like the redundancy piece is we're not in a world, we're not in a secure economy now where there is that very clear career trajectory and you stay in companies with a secure role for long periods of time because people are being made redundant more now than ever before, especially with the rapid implementation of AI and how that shapes workforces. So yeah, I think understanding money and basically making it my responsibility to understand how I can create better financial circumstances for myself and like taking a responsibility to educate myself about money. There's a fantastic organization called Female Invest. They really are putting out amazing content on how to close that gender pay, gender pension, investment gap. It's incredible. And I would encourage anyone listening to this who thinks I'm not very good with money or I don't understand money, I leave that to my partner or I just don't really get it. They have a book and you will learn so much from it. And there are very small things you can do and it's never too late.
I think we have to acknowledge here that if you do not come from a background where there is a financial buffer, you are factoring in those costs. That data point you just mentioned, women working full time already are earning 83p for every £1 men earn. And it makes me sad and it makes me enraged in many ways that I know so many brilliant women that are having to factor in the financial and career progression cost into their motherhood plans because the systems are not built to support us. And this is so key for me. We cannot internalize the system as our own failings. I have so many friends that I speak to who say things to the effect of, like you have, I'd love to be a mother, but there's a certain level that I have to get to for me to feel ready. I hear this conversation again and again and again. And I also hear it often tinged with a little bit of a personal failing narrative that, well, I haven't got here yet, so not yet, or I expected to have children by this point, but I can't yet. That is a systemic failing. It's not your failing. And I want to make that point because the vast majority of people don't have a buffer. They don't have a rich husband who's going to bankroll everything. They care about their careers. They've put work into this. There is a lot to give up. And when we have these data points around the motherhood penalty and what the cost is, it is scary as hell.
I think just on the point there about even if you did have a rich husband, like if something happens later down the line and you have sacrificed your career, I know we're going to talk about the gender pension gap, but like that is one of the huge contributors. So women who sacrifice their career, allowing their husband to go to work, to earn more money, to put more money in his pension. Yes, you might split finances 50-50 in the divorce, but that often doesn't include pensions. So you'll get to an age where you don't have as much of a pension as you could have done because you've effectively sacrificed your career. And I think that's something that many women don't even consider. Like pensions aren't sexy. No one talks about pensions really, but actually they are so critical. Like there's nothing unsexier than not being able to buy yourself dinner at 70 years old. So thinking about it now, like we should make pensions sexy because like financial security when you're older so you don't have to work, especially if you then become ill and need care or support. These things are just, again, we do not talk about them enough. Just touching there on the point you said around women feeling that they have to wait later, like there is evidence that over a 30-year period, women who delayed motherhood earned between, now this is in US dollars, 495,000 and 556,000 more than women who became mothers in their early career. That is not a small difference. That's like $500,000. That is huge. And again, like that's not just earnings, that is pension contributions, that is potential investment contributions as well. The wage penalty is relatively low in your 20s. It peaks in your 30s for women with 2 children. and in your 40s for women with 3 or more. So it's not short term here, it compounds over time. And here's the part that really should make everybody a bit angry. There is no equivalent penalty for men. In fact, men's wages rise by 8 to 14% when they become fathers. It's called the daddy bonus. So same life events, opposite career outcome. Employers perceive fathers as more stable, more committed, more deserving. Fatherhood signals breadwinner, motherhood signals distraction. And that's not data-driven decision making. That's bias dressed up as business logic. We know from the research that women will come back from maternity leave more capable in so many areas. The capabilities that are being asked for from the World Economic Forum for this successful future of work. And it just is crazy to me about this fatherhood bonus. It's the largest for most advantaged men as well. So white, married, college educated, university degrees, professional, and the motherhood penalty is the smallest for the most advantaged women. So the system compounds existing inequality, and the women who can least afford it take the biggest hit.
And there's a collective consciousness piece here, I think, and a perception shift that if every single person shifted their mindset on what it means to be a mother, what it means to be a father, just by 1%, that would make a difference. And that's why we're here, right? Having
Yeah,
this conversation. That's
exactly.
exactly why we're here. So when I think about my career and the decisions I've made, it definitely has been something that I've been conscious of for a really long time. So I come from an interesting background because my mum is Brazilian and my dad is British. My dad was a postman, and my mum had a remarkable story working from cleaner when she immigrated to the UK all the way through to like a VP at JP Morgan. And she was a great example for me of a working mother and breadwinner, but she didn't have me until she was 35.
Mm.
Now, if we think about back in 1992, 35 to have your first child, that was really late. My parents were the oldest parents in the playground. She had my brother at 38, and then she continued building her career from there. And it only really got going for her career wise in her mid 40s. That's when things actually started taking off. So I always have that in the back of my mind. 35 is the beginning. You can't do anything before then because you've got to work, you've got to hustle, you've got to get your money, you've got to get established. So that was my framing. I got into startups where I was able to get senior roles more quickly. Same as you, I think on average, I worked in each of my jobs in my 20s for like 14 months. It was just extra salary, save money, make sure that I feel secure. Everything was guided by this. We talked about the financial stories that you have in your head. Everything for me was driven by, I do not want to depend on any human being for money. I want to have my own back financially. And the best way that I can do this is by working and outworking everybody around me, and also consulting and freelancing and saving. And my financial background as a family was, my parents are super working class. They've never invested a penny
Mm.
in anything. My mum had her pension, my dad had a pension, but investments were a big no-no. That's a risk. You focus on buying a house. That's the pinnacle of wealth. If you have money, you hold on to it and you save it, and you make sure that, you could lose your job at any time. You hold on so tightly. So I really came from an operator from a place of fear. As I got into my 30s and I was operating now at more of a marketing director, marketing leadership role, I think things really changed for me when I was appointed to the board of a fintech scale up. I was 29, and this financially opened up a lot for me because I went from employee to director with all the liability of that, but
Mm.
also the financial benefits of getting director level bonuses and having that exposure. It was a huge amount of work though. And I remember that I got married while I was in that job. That was my first marriage, and it all happened around that time. There was absolutely no way that me being pregnant in that job could have happened.
No.
There was no way. And I remember being very communicative about the fact that, yes, I was married, but we weren't planning on having children anytime soon. Don't look at me differently, because I knew about this career penalty, and I was in preparation mode in anticipation of that. I knew that I was being viewed forensically of like, is she going to have a child? My ovaries were under surveillance. And so I had that in the back of my mind. Then I found myself in a company where I work today, and this is a real privilege point that I want to underline, where having a family was the norm. The leadership were real family people. I was working at a chief marketing officer level. I was the only person on the leadership team who didn't have children, and that leadership team has an equal gender split. This is where I suddenly found myself with a different kind of urgency, which was, when is a set of circumstances going to align for me to be able to do this better than this does? This has to be the time where I go ahead and become a mother, and that's the honest truth. It felt a little bit like, okay, I didn't join the company with the intention of, right, let's get pregnant, because I was married to someone else. It was a very different time for me, and I've been there for over 2 years now. But I did look around me and think, this is probably going to be the only time in my career where any flexibility or generosity is afforded to me to do this. And I think that's really sad, but I have been really aware, and there's an amazing economist and writer called Corinne Lowe, who she's a gender economist, and she talks about how companies all make these quiet calculations about who's worth investing in. I'm aware of that. I know the career penalties that come in anticipation of motherhood. So I have engineered my career decisions and the fact that I'm staying in my role and I'm committed to my role, because I can't think of a better environment that I've ever been in where the time is now. So we know that there's this kind of like anticipation of motherhood career penalty, as employers are looking at you and they're thinking you're more likely to take leave or step back. And then once you're in your 40s, or you're perceived as perimenopausal, menopausal, your childbearing years are behind you, that bias fades. So we're in this very precarious career window as women right now in our 30s, where we're being looked at, we're being kind of scrutinized a little bit. Like, one of the things that I have, being perfectly truthful, is, well, how many children am I going to have? And I've been very much like, well, no, 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 no. I'm just planning on having one for now, like no other plans. Wow. Like, just even thinking about the cognitive load that I'm carrying with that, and the very real fear that I have around, well, I've just about got away with it, but I've been working so hard and up until this work all throughout the pregnancy. Yeah, there's a lot there. And it's something that I'm still navigating and working through, even at this stage of pregnancy. But I don't think I've ever worked as hard as I have than I have while being pregnant. So what does that tell you?
Yeah, you feel like you've got something to prove. And I just want to say, I'm so happy that you have that set up. Like, that is incredible. I
And
think that's
rare.
quite a unique
It's
environment
so
that
rare.
you're in. And a lot of the women that I speak to don't have that experience. They have an experience that is really challenging, and they're having children despite not being in these environments where they're supported and, it's encouraged to have a family. And it doesn't always play out in a really loud way. It's often a small series of invisible shifts. So research shows that mothers are perceived as less competent, less committed. They're held to higher standards, which is what you're talking about there. Like, you're feeling like you are holding yourself to a higher standard despite being in this environment that is supportive. They receive lower recommended salaries. They're less likely to be hired or promoted. Even in firms with female leaders, even in couples where the woman earns more than her partner before having children, the penalty persists. In some cases, it actually increases. So higher earning women experience up to 60% drop from pre-birth earnings relative to their male partners, which is absolutely staggering. And women are much less likely to switch to a higher paying firm after having children, and subsequently more likely to leave the workforce entirely. And we've spoken about this. There was some research done by Matri Coaching last year around how 25% of women either leave their role within 12 months or don't come back from maternity leave at all, which costs around £650 million a year. And that is so problematic from an economical perspective, but also the career mobility that limits women to is really frustrating.
And it's wrong because we're missing out on this hugely advantageous thing called matrescence. Now, I read something, I think it was in Stylist magazine just this week, around this point of like how 85% of women feel that they need to work harder than before once they have children or become pregnant to prove their commitment. And the findings also paint this really bleak picture of how 90% of mothers have had to alter their career path after parenthood, with over half actually switching industries. So, again, not only are we navigating this incredibly identity shifting thing for the first time, we're doing it against a backdrop of all of these data points, all of the fear that comes with it. We're trying to look after ourselves and our health, and then we're being forced to pivot and change and adjust. And it makes me really, really sad because the workplace is dictating when women have children. Like over half of these 900 women surveyed, to our earlier point, so 57% of them said they are delaying starting having a family due to career pressures. You know, or on the flip side, actually, really interestingly, 32% had children sooner than they had wanted because of job insecurity. So people are all balancing this timing of like, is now the right time? Is my bank balance quite right? Is this the right job to do? Okay, this might be it. Like, and that is a mindful, and that is so far removed from what's natural about this process. And as women who really care about our careers, who have invested fully in them, my career has been everything to me, quite frankly. It's been the thing that's given me confidence, that's made me feel safe, and I love it. I love what I do. I need to work. Working for me is so important. And I can't tell you how I'm going to be on the other side of maternity leave, but what I can tell you is that work has been the thing that's kept me going through some also really difficult, dark times. But if you're listening to this and you're internalizing these data points and you're thinking, I'm not in a role that's going to be able to support me in the way that I want to be supported, or I don't have enough money right now, or I'm not career level wise, where I need to be, my God, I get it. I get it. You're not alone in it, and it's not your failing. Please do not internalize a system that is failing you.
Systemically, it's very complicated, but not all is lost. And we are going to talk a little bit more about that in the next episode, about what practical things you can do to support you through this. And it doesn't have to be a linear approach, I think is really important to highlight there. It doesn't have to be linear anymore. We have to adapt our approach, quite frankly.
We do. We have to exist in response to a system that's failing us. And I actually read a LinkedIn post this week that I have to share, which says, nobody tells you this before you go out on maternity leave. The thank you post, the I'm so lucky to work somewhere that supports family post, write it, post it, date stamp it publicly. Not because you owe them gratitude, but because you're creating a paper trail. Now, this is so fascinating to me. So when you're about to go on leave or you're on it right now, post. Talk about your role. Talk about what you're working on. Talk about how excited you are to come back. Then when you return, post again. And if something happens between those two posts or shortly after, your network can do the maths. You don't have to accuse anyone of anything. The timeline speaks for itself. To every woman who came back to a demoted role, a frozen out team, a restructuring that only seemed to affect her, you weren't imagining it and you weren't alone. Post. Just have to share that.
That is such a good post. And actually,
I know.
Something that's coming up in my research a lot, I know I've shared about my own redundancy story, but when I've been doing my research, so many women have said to me that they are being made redundant at that point of coming back into the workforce. And they describe the same pattern in many cases, which is really concerning. I'm currently in the process of doing more research to understand this more deeply. So, the pattern that's being described is when they're announcing their pregnancy in the organization, there is a shift in behavior from their leadership team, whether that's their manager or the broader leadership team. They then go off on maternity leave. And then when they try and come back, there is some sort of barrier being put in place. So whether that is a denied flexible working request or lack of
Mhm.
flexibility around nursery pickups, there is some sort of friction coming back. And then when they actually come back, they are made redundant within the first 6 months. And often that redundancy is not done through the redundancy process, it's settled. And what's really interesting here is this is the time women coming back into the workforce, they are the most vulnerable at this time. They have got an extra mouth to feed. Especially if it's their first baby, they've gone through the matrescence, the whole identity shift that comes with that. There's a whole set of skills that they've not used for 6, 9, 12 months, however long they've taken off. Of course, they are going to take a settlement because most of the time settlements come with greater financial
They
security.
need the money.
They need the money, but also with
Yeah.
taking that money, you lose your voice.
You
So
lose your voice.
I'm building this research out at the moment, but this pattern is quite shocking. I think it should be, we should talk about what's actually happening. Just to add a little bit more context, a 2025 survey found that 12.3% of women are sacked, constructively dismissed, or made redundant while pregnant, on maternity leave, or within a year of returning. If you scale that up to the general population, you're looking at around 74,000 women a year forced out of their jobs. They're not bad employees, like this is systemic. Almost half of pregnant women or those returning from maternity leave reported a negative experience at work. A third said they were sidelined or demoted. And of those who experienced the discrimination, only 2% raised a tribunal claim. 2%, and the rest absorbed it, moved on, and blamed themselves, which is absolutely heartbreaking. Another study found that 77% of mothers surveyed that they had a negative or possibly discriminatory experience during pregnancy, maternity leave, or returning to work. And 11% of those women felt forced to leave their job entirely. That, if you scale that up, is around 54,000 women a year. So there is a law to protect women coming back into the workforce up to 18 months after birth. So if you are made redundant, you should be offered a suitable alternative role. But often, these suitable alternative roles aren't available because they must be full-time, lack of flexibility. And again, this is one of the barriers that I'm hearing as part of my research is these obstacles being put in the way. So there is no suitable alternative role because I was working 4 days a week or I had a flexible working schedule. So companies seemingly are working this as a bit of a system. I think what would be really concerning, and actually what I'm hoping as part of my research, that none of this is true. Like, I would love for this to be some wild conspiracy theory that organizations are making women redundant at the point of return. Because if this is true and companies are manipulating the redundancy laws, the process around redundancy, then that is absolutely appalling. But the pattern that I'm hearing is just more and more shocking. And there isn't much support for women in these positions. There are some great companies doing amazing work supporting women, getting them back into the workforce after they've been made redundant. But quite often that's at the women their own expense. So if you think at this position, there are amazing coaches, there's amazing coaching programs, there's amazing redundancy communities. Most of those are paid for. Obviously they're businesses, but like that's paid for by the individual who's gone through this experience, who is now concerned about money and finances because they're looking for a new job.
This idea of women having to invest so much of their money when they're already paying out like never before as new mums to try and preserve their careers, to try and keep on the career ladder is all kinds of wrong. We know that so many companies, and you'll know better than I do, have L&D budgets, for example. They have training budgets. Why would we not utilize it at this exact time for our female employees going through this? And if women are getting back into the workforce, the equation feels entirely off to me. And as you say, I hope it's a conspiracy theory, but I have a very bad sneaking suspicion that it's not, as there's no smoke without fire. And what a loss to those employers as well. Because when I'm hearing from mothers again and again, and they're holding their babies for the first time, that sense of purpose, that shift to ambition that's happening, that refocusing of priorities isn't solely for that child, it's to provide for that child. So think about the motivation that you're just giving up on when you're making these women quietly redundant because it seems inconvenient to you. It's so narrow-minded.
Yeah, it's an own goal, honestly. And again, we've
Total.
spoken about this before around the skills and capabilities that are strengthened through matrescence, that you are letting highly talented women walk out of the workforce, which seemed great for the organization at that time. They might think that, because of the perception of motherhood, but actually like economically down the line, like that is a problem and that will stop women from having babies. And it's just, yeah, super frustrating.
I'm 35 weeks pregnant, and what all this data is telling me, loud and clear, is our options as new mothers so often are step out, step down, or step aside, really, for your career. That's the picture that this data is painting. One of the things that I have considered myself, that I have thought through and seen modeled to me, is to stay in the game, still taking a pay cut and stepping aside a little by going part-time. Now, there's a lot of considerations with this.
Hmm.
You have to do an equation of childcare cost versus your earnings. You have to think about what you can realistically do, and it's very complicated. So talk to me about this part-time. It almost feels like a trap in many ways. What are your thoughts on it? What does the data show? What have you been learning about it?
Oh, this is a sad reality of what happens to women's careers. So the ONS data from 2025 showed that 5 years after your first child, a mother's earnings are reduced by an average of 42%. So that's about £1,000 a month less than they were earning before birth. The
Yeah.
total earnings loss over 5 years averages around £65,000 after your first child. And that's not a temporary dip. Like that is a huge crater, which will have that knock-on effect on the gender pension gap, gender investment gap, all of the other financial gaps that we talk about. Fewer than 1 in 5 mothers return to full-time work in the first 3 years. So that's 1 in 5 goes back full-time. After 5 years, it drops to 15%. Meanwhile, 90% of new fathers are in full-time work or self-employment 3 years after their first child is born. Same household, same baby, completely different career and earning trajectory. So this is what happens to women who go part-time. So this is an occupational downgrade. So 1 in 3 women who were corporate managers before having children move down the career ladder. 2/3 of them end up in clerical roles. There's also research from King's College that spells it out quite clearly. Part-time jobs are more likely to be poor quality. Mothers working part-time have less autonomy, less schedule control, less flexibility, ironically, than full-time workers, and they're more likely to work overtime because a part-time role still carries a full-time workload. So the trade-off women are making isn't slightly less money for more time with the kids. It's a significantly worse job, earning significantly less, you lose your career momentum, and probably you never recover the trajectory you were on. And research shows that mothers' wages are 7% lower than childless women after 5 years and 15% lower a decade later. And as for the women who leave employment completely and try and come back, they are 3 times more likely to return to lower paid or lower responsibility roles than those who stayed. And there are amazing organisations. So there's one called the Return Hub, who I worked with previously, who help women returners get back into the workforce. There are people trying to help. But the system essentially punishes every single option. Stay full-time and you're judged. Go part-time and you're downgraded. Leave and you can't get back at your level. The only option that works is having a partner who adjusts equally. And we know the data on how often that happens. Let's be real.
So as I think about this, I really sit here not knowing how I'm going to balance it all, because seeing Instagram posts like work as if you don't have children and mother as if you don't have a job, they're terrifying. How am I going to do that? How could I possibly do that? And I come at this from a position of privilege. So we have a system to contend with. But what I'm very intrigued to talk about is what we can do about it. I want to end on a note of a headline that I saw in Business Insider recently, which I thought was just phenomenal and I think is a great note to wrap this conversation on. America's mums are losing their jobs, but they may end up richer. Now, this is so intriguing to me. And it's not from operating within the system as we know it. It's from getting entrepreneurial, portfolio careers, freelancing, and rethinking the whole damn thing entirely. So I'm looking forward to part 2. We've spoken about the system. Let's talk about what we do about it.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about this next episode. So women are controlling 95% of consumer spend. Like, that is huge. But also with that, as I said earlier, like, the ambition for these mothers when they come back from maternity leave, it hasn't gone anywhere. So this, I think, next episode, I'm so excited to get into, and the advantages that we can reframe.
Maybe it's not about looking at the existing system, but actually creating an entirely new system for ourselves. I'm excited. It's not just a problem story, it's a power story. And as ever with our podcast, it starts with understanding what matrescence is actually building in you and then using that to your advantage. And of course, I'm out here tracking that in real time. These data points are scary, they're intimidating, but they also create this little shoot of optimism and possibility for me about how, okay, if I have all of this to contend with, and I'm already feeling guilt. This week I worked really hard launching a new brand at the company I work for, standing up on stage, and my body was really tired and I felt really worried for my baby. Already that guilt, that balance, the equilibrium just doesn't exist. But what can? That's going to be our focus for part 2.
Yeah, I think it's less focus on breaking glass ceilings and more focus on knocking down some walls and being a bit more expansive and doing things a bit differently.
And building an entirely new house.
Thank you all for joining us today.
If you've taken something from this episode, we'd be so grateful if you shared it with a friend.
We'd also love to hear from you. Find us on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. And please share your questions, comments, and experiences. This is a conversation we want to build together.
Until next time.